everyone. Thanks for joining us and everyone online. So today we're talking about photography in the environment, which for our panelists means three, I suspect, very, very different things. We have Wasim Muklashy, we have Robert Hurt from NASA, and we have Cristina Mittermeier. I'll start with you, Robert, because your camera right now is 133 million miles away. Is that right?
That's right. I couldn't bring it to stage because it's off floating on its own orbit around the sun.
So can you give me just a really quick bio? Just a really quick biography. Who are you and what do you do?
I work for NASA's Spitzer Space Telescope mission, and my job there is really one of the coolest in the world. It's science visualization, data visualization for outreach and communications purposes. So my job is to basically take research data and turn it into the imagery that we share with the public to sort of engage people and really tell the story of all the myriad stories of the universe.
So this panel is ostensibly about photography and the environment, the human environment. And how has your work at NASA, how has your work in outer space photography affected how you view our home planet and our habitat?
Well, obviously, our cameras are all turning away from the Earth, though, of course, NASA has plenty of cameras that turn towards the Earth and tell us that story as well. But I think the story that comes across when you really look at this as an astronomer, the story of the uniqueness of Earth becomes really, really vivid. That we show these images, the vastness of space, the incredible nebulae and the regions where stars and planets are forming. But when you start digging into these images and understand the sparseness of space and how far it is just to the next star, and the fact that today these missions, we've literally discovered thousands of planets around other stars, and we have yet to come spot on to anything like the Earth. I think the closest we've come today is something that's almost half again as large as the Earth. Seriously, we're not even sure if it has like a gaseous surface or a solid surface, right? But the fact that Earth so far is a singular, unique place that's suitable for life, I think, in a really big picture story, right? It reminds us, there aren't other places to go to, if we screw this one up. This is a unique, ideal jewel for us.
So Cristina, you've been an environmental photographer now for more than 20 years, and you started as a marine biologist. And are you optimistic about our environment, about the Earth at this point, or not? Or have things changed for the worse in the time you've been observing?
Well, you realize that nothing I say after what he just said is going to sound cool, right? Pretty awesome. Am I optimistic about where we're at in our planetary history? I was listening to the news this week, and they're all talking about water and Mars, and they truly are talking like we're moving to Mars, And I find it shocking that people actually have this idea that we're going to carry with us all the food, all the water, all the air that we all need to live in Mars, when we have a perfectly beautiful planet that we can live in right here. Am I optimistic? I think there's reasons to be optimistic. I think humans are really clever animals, and I keep hoping that we're going to turn this around at the last minute. But I was listening the other day to Dr. James Lovelock, and he's the one that came up with the theory of Gaia. I met him 20 years ago, and I've always been inspired by his work. And he was on Facebook basically saying, you know what? Nothing we can do is going to change it. It's too far gone, so just go out there and enjoy while you can. I thought,
sounds like James Lovelock.
I cannot go to bed thinking that tomorrow I'm not going to get up and try. I went to school to become a marine biologist, but in Mexico we didn't have that. So I went to something that sounded close. It was biochemical engineering in the exploitation of marine resources. And that was pretty depressing because we were learning how to catch more fish, bigger fish, more efficiently. And we've done a very good job. 20 years later, we've lost half of all the biodiversity on the ocean. It is pretty depressing, but hey, half of it is still there. And as long as we have something that we can still work for, I'm pretty encouraged. I'm going to give it a good fight. I hope you guys will too, right? Yeah, you have nowhere else to go.
Not for now.
Not for now.
So what do you think the responsibility of photographers is in this context?
I think I've had a lot of crazy ideas in my career, but my single most interesting contribution was just to inspire photographers to say, what we have in our hands, this creative ability, is just the most interesting tool to engage people. I was a scientist, and so I published scientific papers that I thought were very interesting. Guess what? Have you ever read my scientific papers? It's pretty boring, but photography is the cornerstone of storytelling. And science is a linear process that doesn't really explain our very complex relationship with nature, with each other, with our beautiful planet, but storytelling can. And photography is uniquely poised because when you look at a photograph, it makes you stop and it makes you internalize the information in a very different way, and it makes you start a conversation with yourself, with the subject in the image, and with the audience at large. So what's the responsibility of photographers? I just listened to Von Wang talk in the main stage, and he was talking about making an extraordinary career in photography, and how at a certain point all your extraordinary images are not going to feed your soul until you find sense of purpose. And so that's the responsibility. Find the purpose in your work.
I think you and I are coming from very, very similar directions, because likewise, the very technical stories that we have, no one will stop and linger on a 3-line description of some technical esoteric aspect of interactions between gravitational objects. But if you have that image that captures the excitement and the thrill, right? That's where the engagement moment happens. And that image is what lures you in, whether it's learning about the environment or anything, any story, right? That image is actually the first hook of the story, the real narrative you're telling people.
So Wasim, let's bring you in. I know you haven't always been a photographer. You haven't always been a photographer with a conservational passion. I mean, what got you into this?
It was a circumstance. So I started off doing a lot of video. I came out of college and I started doing a lot of video, a lot of corporate video. I was stuck in the media world. We were doing things for news, broadcast news video and stuff like that. And I wasn't really feeling it. There was a lot of, I guess, anxiety in the sense that everything was always deadline oriented. I never had time to really process anything. It was just like react, because if you don't react, then you think you're either going to be left behind or whatever. And so then by chance, I just wanted to make a complete change. And so I moved out of that city, which I grew up in LA and Venice, Santa Monica, that whole thing. And I moved up into the hills. And when I moved up into the hills, my entire chemical composition of my brain just changed.
You're based in California, right?
I'm in California, in the Santa Monica Mountains right now. And so when I got up there, I started realizing that after I spent some time up there, that I was actually able to be more in touch and in tune with myself. And the more in touch and in tune with myself I was, the more in touch and in tune I was with everything around me. And that really changed everything, and that's kind of guided my so I got out of the news video world, the corporate video world, and all that stuff, and I started focusing more on the conservation, because I realized that there's value in this that most people have no idea about. And with the tools that we have now to give access to these people that may have never, like I lived in LA for 30 some odd years, I never knew that existed, and then once I did, it's just changed my complete life. And now that we have those tools, I feel that it's partly my responsibility to share that with those people as well, and to bring them into that world as well, because I mean, there's more and more studies coming out, scientific studies, philosophical studies, whatever it is, that nature, how connected we are to it, and the more connected we are to it, the happier that we are, and the more whole and complete that we become. So I feel that that's part of my responsibility, since I feel that, and I felt that and experienced that, to continue to pass that along.
So how do you? I know you work a lot in state and national parks in California. I mean, how do you channel that passion into your work specifically? What do you think your mission is there?
What my mission is with that? It's twofold, and it's kind of contradictory, because the technology that we have today is technology, and then the nature world. I want to use the technology that we have today to bring awareness to our natural world, because the more awareness that we have in that natural world, the more people will feel connected to that natural world. And the more people feel connected to that natural world, the more they're going to feel inclined to help conserve that natural world. So it's kind of that train of thought is the train of thought that I'm going with.
Cristina, I know you've worked in environments and communities all over the world now for quite a long time. I mean, can you give us an example of a time when you genuinely feel that your pictures have actually made a difference?
As photographers, one of the first things we need to acknowledge is that pictures themselves on their own can only accomplish so much. I was having a great conversation yesterday with a conservation group, because they were asking me the same question, and I was saying, the only way it works is when you find the partnerships. And it really is all about collaborating with the scientists, with the people that are inserted into the policy, and then your images can help, bring the public awareness, build a constituency that supports the conservation, and that just tips the agenda. But you can never take credit for the whole thing as if you just made it happen on your own. But I've been part of many wonderful battles, and nothing feels as good as having a victory, you know, where you can say, okay, together we accomplished something. And, you know, that's a feeling that I want to have over and over again. So.
So if you could go, and Robert, I'll bring this back to you. We started exploring space 50 years ago. First human to go into space was 50-something years ago. Where do you think humans need to be in another 50 years?
Well, in another 50 years, I mean, when you look at how much our view of the universe has changed in you know, the span of my life, you know, and you know, the last 50 years or so, I think where we're looking, I mean, the big questions really that come back over and over again that what we want to answer is, you know, really, are we alone in the universe? And I mean that on many levels. I mean, there's the search for intelligent life out there looking for signals, but there's really this fundamental search of any hint of biological processes. Now, when we look at this universe, right, nothing ever happens in ones, right? If something can happen, it will happen. But the question we don't understand really about life is life a 1 in a billion thing? If you have water, if you have the right temperature, or is it a 1 in a million? Is it 1 in 1,000? Is it 1 in 5? Right? This is why we're so violently interested in you know, exploring Mars for any hint of microbial life on Mars, or you know, the atmosphere, the Jupiter moons, the Titan around Saturn. You know, anything that has any kind of liquid, even if it's not water. Right? If we can answer that question of any hint of life occurring again in our solar system, that gives this idea that life is going to be a very, very rich, common thing in the universe. And in 50 years, we're either going to be at a point where we say, yes, we found life in the universe, and we can start to understand how we fit in that context, or we will not have found life. And either way, it's really important for the way we look at ourselves. Because if we find in 50 years we still haven't seen life anywhere else, it just re-emphasizes the uniqueness, the rareness, and the preciousness of life here. And if we do find life elsewhere, some hint of it, then it also reinforces the fact that we are still the only place that our life exists, that it will be incredibly different in some level or another. It's, right, the protein sequences will be incompatible. You know, it's like we are still going to be a unique island of life. And so one way or another in the next 50 years, I think that perspective of how importantly unique and precious we are, I think will come out in the narrative, regardless of what the answers end up being.
So Wasim, I know part of your mission as a photographer is to try and get people into the national parks, get people into the state parks and appreciate the environment that they're in. And you're in California, 4 years into an official drought, longer than that probably in reality.
It's painful.
And you must have seen the environment change. And do you think people's attitudes are changing finally?
I think they're starting to. I think that once it hit really close to home when the governor, we were basically mandatory, we had to cut our water usage in Southern California, and part of me was like, no one is going to pay attention to this. No one really cares because they still, you know, when they turn on their faucet, there's still water coming out of it. But when the statistics came out about 3 or 4 weeks ago and they said that we had actually cut water use by 31% instead of the 25% they asked us, I was like, okay, that's an extremely encouraging sign because people are listening and people are caring and people are understanding. And it's really hard to go through California right now without seeing the signs. The trees are, the soil is not being held together because there's not water holding together. Trees are just falling over, like oak trees. There are, you know, the iconic California oak trees are disappearing due to borers, and there's like the beetle that's coming. It's just, it's really hard not to see it. And so when you see it with your very own eyes, it touches you again, and you feel compelled to act. And so by seeing that 31% instead of the 25%, people actually made that adjustment in their life because they realized how vital it was. I think it's definitely working, and I think it's because of technology and because of the fact that we can get that message around quicker, you know. And it's as ironic as it sounds, it's turned me into an extremely, almost to a fault, optimist.
This is my next question actually for the whole panel. Yeah, you just said you are. At this point, you say you are an optimist.
Yes.
Why is that?
Because the more that people seem to be connecting together using these technologies, whether it be the internet, email, Twitter, Instagram, like they're being exposed to things that they would have never been able to be exposed to even 10 years ago. they're starting to connect cerebrally with these things as well. And the more that they connect with that, the more they start connecting with other people in an empathetic way, which they were never able to connect with as well either, because the channels of communication are now open to anybody and everybody. It's not just a select few that we have to get our information from. Everybody has that opportunity. So the optimism comes from the fact that with power and numbers, people seem to be inherently good. And and just following with that, because people are inherently good, that the more that people start connecting, and there's only 43 or 44% of the world is connected by the internet right now, so there's still 50, there's still more than half of the world's population is not connected yet. The more that we start connecting, the more empathetic we'll become with each other, and the more we'll work together to make those things happen. So we're seeing small signs of that happening, and that's really encouraging to me.
So Cristina, are you an optimist at this point?
I really am, and for the same reasons that you cite, but also because I feel like we've had an extraordinary last 50 years. From the time I was a child, when we had those televisions that you had to get up and switch the channels, to a time when we are so, it's so comfortable to be alive today, when you can go to the grocery store and get lettuce and oranges and wines from Chile and Australia every day. We've come to expect it, and it's a wonderful thing, but we all know that it comes at a price. And we all know that in order to maintain a sustainable planet, the ecological integrity of our planet, we're going to have to hold back a little bit on that, It's, there's only two forces on the planet, the economical forces and Mother Nature, and only one is going to get out of the way. And as we've seen in California, it's, when it hits you in your own health and in your own wallet, you start paying a lot more attention. And because we're connected around the world and we're seeing how these, catastrophes, it's happening more often, and it's happening to a lot of people, and to some of the poorest people on the planet, you just can't help but feel empathetic and compassionate. And to me, that's a great sign of hope. You can only feel hopeful to know that we are all in this little ship together.
And then look at the peer-to-peer model of what's happening. We're seeing when there's catastrophes around the world, people are stepping in and helping these things immediately. Before even a Red Cross will show up or something like that, people are immediately stepping in and they're helping out because they connect directly and instantaneously with where catastrophes are happening. We saw it happen, I think, in Haiti. We saw it happen, with the, was it the earthquake that just happened in, where was the earthquake? I forgot where the earthquake was that just happened, but people are just automatically connecting, and they're able to send money right away. They're able to send help right away. They're able to communicate with each other right away. So it just goes back to the same thing. It's
And I love the Green Pope.
yeah, right.
Great message. Good timing.
Huge fan of the Pope. So we're running out of time a little here. I just want to ask one question actually about compassion fatigue, because there are so many images in the world now, and the speed of the dissemination is so much faster than it was. Do you think back in the 80s, the Live Aid, the pictures of the starving children had a really shocking impact because no one had seen them before? Do you think that the incredible rush and dissemination of images at this point all around the world has a deadening effect? It's a question for Cristina.
It's a great question. I've been saying for a long time, because I've been working within the conservation community for a long time, that we saw those images come out and everybody was compelled to save the whales and to send money to Biafra or whatever, but within the conservation and environmental community, we failed to invest sufficiently in communications, and especially in visual communications, to the point that the whole infrastructure that funds conservation is geared towards funding science. But if you try to apply for a grant to create a video or to do a photo exhibit or to come up with any communications project, it's seen as this black hole of raising awareness, and very few foundations, very few donors are interested in funding that kind of thing. And so the big failure of the environmental movement was to communicate at the adequate scope and the adequate scale. And I feel that that's where the need is today, and I don't think there's a saturation of images because there's very few extraordinarily good images. There's a saturation of crappy images, But if you make a beautiful salient image with an incredible story behind it, people gravitate towards it.
So how do you aim to do that in your career, Wasim? How do you try and make your images stick in a world where billions of images get taken every day?
Well, I'll do a lot more. I have a talk tomorrow that actually it's focusing a lot on that, but a lot of it is I've learned to really kind of absorb my environment. once I get there. So I won't start shooting sometimes for hours or days, even if I have the luxury. Because when you do that, that environment starts to become a part of you. So you're not just there to take a picture, you're actually a part of that environment. And when that environment actually becomes a part of you, it becomes more personal, and that comes across in your images or whatever work you're doing. If you're writing, if you're doing videos, whatever it is that you're doing, it just naturally comes across because it becomes an extension of you rather than just a place you're visiting or a place you're looking at. You start to feel it. So the images that come out of my camera, the final images, are those images that I connected to most personally with. And it seems that those are also the ones that other people connect with most personally with too, because it's not just an image, it's a feeling in a sense. So.
I have one final question. We have a minute left. This is a final question for Robert. As we said before, your camera is 133 million miles away and is pointed far into space, looking far back in time. Glass half full, glass half empty. Are humans valuable and unique, or are they insignificant?
I think, honestly, this is an interesting question. People say, how can you look at that and not feel completely insignificant? This is the question, right? When you say billions and billions of world, but the whole point of feeling insignificant is to remind you just how special you are. To be like that one spot in hundreds of billions of stars where matter has arranged itself in a way that becomes self-aware and ability to perceive where it is in the universe. That is a precious spark. And if it only happens once in an entire galaxy, that is both insignificant and the most important spot in the galaxy at the same time. So,
thank you. That's a wonderful answer to the question, and it's nice to end on an up note. Thank you, everybody, for your time today.
thank you.
And thank you for watching.
You.